Thank you. That introduction is about the length of my presentation. But thank you for that. Please enjoy your lunch. I'll try to be somewhat interesting, so I'll try to get you to divide your attention. I wanted to start out by thanking Dr. Neff. Where's Dr. Neff? He called me. There he is, right back there. If you don't know Dr. Neff, been a critically important part of Fresno State over the last many years, and he called me not that long ago and said, told me about this meeting, and so I was happy to participate. And it reminded me that for the students in the room, the last time I spoke to this group was in 2002. And so many of you weren't around at that time. It's taken 20-some years. It's taken 20-some years for them to invite me back. That could be a message in itself. I was invited 22 years ago to speak because we had done something in California with government that has been more and more difficult to achieve ever since. For farmers in the room, when you get invoices from various vendors, at the bottom of the invoice, you see oftentimes a 2% roughly charge instead of an 8% charge. That's what we did in 2001 with the state budget when politics in California made that possible. And so ever since then, us farmers have been able to benefit from that, even while we're paying so much more on regulations and the like. At least when we buy a tractor and tools and et cetera, it's 2%, it's not 8%. California agriculture did that, and I was telling the group in 2002 how we did it, or at least some of how we did it. I never put what I say in print because of the work I do, but it gets very complex, and working with legislators, and it was complex then. But we were able to accomplish it. Since then, to a great degree, we've been on a downhill slide, and here we are today. So I want to talk about how some of this has gone, how some of this is going. But again, I wanted to compliment the panel today. Many friends of mine on the two panels you heard from today, very informed, very effective in the work they do. And so I'm glad that was all assembled as well. The students in the room. I understand we have some students in the room. Can you raise your hand? Oh, wonderful. That's wonderful. What I want to talk about to a great degree is to these students, because I want to tell these students what I didn't know when I was a student. I just didn't know. I was a student at Cal Poly. I'm in ag business. I'm going to go do something in agriculture. But I didn't know the complexity of what I was headed to. You students are headed, and you're very close to this complexity because how California has evolved. And so I'd like you to pay attention, take some notes, if you will, about the state of affairs, at least as I see them in California. So it goes like this. I always enjoy meeting with my colleagues, many in the room here today. Nice to see everyone. I come from a little town called Harmony, California. Anybody been to Harmony, California, been by it? Well, if you go to Hearst Castle and then move down the coastline to Cambria, then you get to Harmony, and then you go to Cayucas, and that's where I came from. And so my beginnings in agriculture were there. It's always been at the forefront of my life. And so from those kitchen table days when I was a kid, to milking cows when I was old enough, to driving tractor, and then walking the halls of Sacramento, I've come to certain thoughts in my mind that I'd like to share with you today. And so as I look at my own evolution, both in experience in agriculture, but just my whole thought process about how I'm going to survive in agriculture to this day. I'm a farmer, like farmers in this room. I grow feeder cattle. By the way, in being announced, pistachios was mentioned, walnuts was mentioned, but what wasn't mentioned was agave. I am a grower of agave, unlike many of you, but that'll come in time, especially if those of us at the forefront actually make some money someday growing agave. That's to be determined. There's a young student that I just met. She wants to be in the tequila business later on. So I'm going to try to figure out how to work with her. And maybe she can give us some good ideas on how to market all of this agave that a few of us are growing. In my development over the decades, I've heard a lot of optimism in agriculture. People say if you're in agriculture, you have to be an optimist. I've heard pessimism in agriculture, and I understand why. But for me, all of that conversation over the decades has blended into realism. I understand optimism, I understand pessimism, I think. But I think, for me anyway, my successes, whatever they have been, is when I've tried to look and think through issues and come to a realistic conclusion about what's in front of me. And then try to deal with that. So as I talk to you today, it's from a realist point of view, hopefully having thought through these issues to some degree. Our current situation in agriculture, as I expressed to Dr. Neff when he called, is one of transformation. Now, I know, just in life, we're all changing every day. I mean, life is changing every day for us. But I know something else, from my experience anyway. The transformations that are occurring today are extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. These will make the history books. All of you in whatever business you are in agriculture, you can go back to in 1950 something happened, in 1970 something happened like that. This is happening right now to us. It's enormous. It's going to make the history books. And we've got to be a lot better at what we're doing, in my view, if we intend to end up on the right side of history. Really challenging. Sigma. It's been talked about today. I think generally we all kind of sort of think we understand Sigma and what it's about. I want to take you back to a conversation I had with the Chief of Staff to Governor Brown just before Sigma became law. It was a very direct conversation because I think with political figures, you don't need to be argumentative, but you need to be direct. You need to have them understand your point of view just like you are obligated to understand theirs, and you try to figure out how it's going to work out for everybody. Governor Brown's Chief of Staff calls me and says, the governor tells me that your clients are opposed to Sigma. I said, well, the governor's misinformed. I'm not opposed to Sigma because Sigma is designed to save our aquifers, and we in agriculture, we as a society need to save our aquifers. We just have to. There's no choice. I said what I am opposed to on behalf of my clients is I'm opposed to a unilateral, one-dimensional decision being made about something that is multi-dimensional for not only agriculture but for society. It's easy to go in and restrict groundwater because where's the political pushback on that to a great extent, except maybe from agriculture? But where's the balance that comes here? What about the surface water? You're talking about the largest agricultural industry in the United States, California agriculture, and you're talking about taking away one of their tools. I understand. As a farmer, we have to protect aquifers, I'm telling the Chief of Staff, but where's your work, where's your commitment on surface water? I happen to believe that we have enough water in California. We just don't manage it in a way that allows all of us to coexist. So the Chief of Staff got more than she bargained for, I guess, because I said, we exist. It's not as though this is 1850 and we're just starting in California. We're here, we exist. Where is the work? Where is the effort to deal with surface water so that all this water is managed Well, there was a lot of silence on that end. The governor had the votes. We didn't. The governor prevailed with Sigma. We have it today. We're headed towards 1 million acres of farmland. We're going to fallow 1 million acres of farmland. When we had the dust storm here in the valley just the other day, it kind of made me flash back. Not that I was there then, but the Dust Bowl of the 1930s and those pictures of the clouds of dust, it was happening just the other day. You fallow a lot of acreage of anything and just have dirt out there, eventually you're going to get those environmental domino effects. And so we have that, in my view, with Sigma. We don't have the political will in Sacramento to balance it out and deal more effectively with surface water, so here we are. We get what we get. That's a transformational moment that we'll never forget. Zero emissions, an aspirational goal by government. I remember the days when we were using diesel, and now all of a sudden that was the enemy and we're going to use electricity. And now we're going to shut down Diablo Canyon on the Central Coast. You notice it's been given new life for another 5 years anyway, and I suspect longer than that, because the state of California and the politicians in it were headed for brownouts and blackouts. They want zero emissions from cars and everything, tractors, batteries that weigh almost as much as the tractor. That's their aspirational goal, but they lack the funding for it. They lack the infrastructure for it. It cannot happen. In the process, though, all of us are driven by edicts that come from government. And so that's another one of these transformational moments that has to be dealt with, and it's a significant one. I happened to be there when Governor Pete Wilson, some of you will remember that name in your history books. Governor Pete Wilson was a friend of mine, and we talked a lot. And he said, we've got to create Cal EPA. We have to create it because we have all these government agencies just kind of out there independent from one another. I want to create a Cal EPA that's going to bring them together so we can be coordinated. Well, many in agriculture were leery about his idea, but he was a friend of ours. Everybody's in agriculture just about. And so agriculture accepted his wisdom with the edict, or with the provision, that there was going to be a review of all these regulations that this new thing called Department of Pesticide Regulation was going to do. It was going to have to be reviewed through the Department of Agriculture to make sure that farmers were taken into consideration before regulations were adopted. That may have made the history books, but it's not in the minds of any people in Sacramento today, or very few of them. DPR that was created in 1991 is unrecognizable today. It's unrecognizable. And there's no indication there's a willingness to create the balance between what farmers need, what consumers need, you know, the whole community of interest in California. And so another moment in time, big deal. Crop protection tools are being eliminated. Very few are being brought online, new ones. Now, we made an agreement with government this last year that's supposed to temper that. We'll see. So I have that in the list, but let me give you one more. The tunnel that the Governor Newsom is proposing. Governor Brown wanted 2 tunnels to go through the Delta. Governor Newsom wants 1. But the tunnel's an interesting story. It's moving water. We need to be able to move water from north to south. The problem with the tunnel is not the movement of the water, it's the cost of the water being moved. The urban communities can pay the bill for water. Agriculture, to my understanding of the numbers, is not even close. 4,000, 5,000, I hear all kinds of numbers per acre, foot of water. I don't know the crop that you can make a profit on spending that kind of money for water. So on the one hand, we're talking about a tunnel that's coming through that's going to actually move the water efficiently and effectively, but it's really for other people to a great extent from my analysis. It's for urban people, and they need it. No argument there. I don't know what it does for us in agriculture, and that is not really much of a consideration. Just like with Sigma, agriculture wasn't much of a consideration. You students, this is the industry you want to go into. If you're not better, smarter, more focused than I was when I was your age, it's going to be tough out there. It's not as though you can't succeed. You just got to be smarter. You've got to be more engaged if you intend to succeed in your career in agriculture. I hope that's encouraging to you and not depressing. But I think that's the reality, back to realism, that you need to have. How did we get here? Duty of care is a term that's used in the law profession. If a lawyer violates the duty of care that results in injury or loss to a client, it's malpractice. It's malpractice. You've all heard the term. That's in the law business. In the political world, it's a happy coincidence when malpractice is avoided. Think about it. Duty of care is our responsibility, every last one of us in this room. Not only to be successful in our own lives, but taking care of the surrounding community so that everyone is benefiting from our collective efforts. When you get into government, it has been to some degree, but it is clearly now, if you've got the votes. Sigma in 2014, one side had the votes, the other didn't, and we end up with this one-dimensional law. Duty of care is missing to a great extent in my analysis of the governmental process to this day. There's not enough thought about what's this do to other people? Does everybody benefit from a decision, or are we just pawns in a game? It worries me a lot. It worries me a lot that California agriculture is a pawn in a game, and we really don't have the political tools to win this game as much as we're entitled to, in my opinion, but as much as we can create. We can't create the circumstances, at least to date, that allow us to really be effective in messaging, and as a result, we get what we get. The legislature lacks oversight. There was a time when members of the legislature would call over to their office people who run these regulatory agencies. One of the panels talked about this. Regulators get a law and then they invent what they think that law says. It's like we're dealing with one law and then we have another law that spins from the first law. There used to be a time when the legislature would create an oversight situation for all these agencies of government to come in and talk with the legislature. It doesn't exist today. And I've tried and failed. I hate to ever fail. All of us feel the same, I'm sure. But I've tried to convince legislators over the years, call them over, find out what they're doing. When I worked for the legislature, that's what we did. And so things weren't perfect, but at least there was communication. Communication is greatly lacking in this day, and it's not getting better. It used to be that people would try to embrace the best idea. In my law practice, in my farming operation, I love ideas. The best idea wins for me. And yet, a lot of times the best idea is a combination of ideas. But if people aren't talking and communicating effectively, then best ideas are just blown away in the wind too often. So what do we do? What do we do about this? I want to go through a few examples. Too often, we in agriculture are witnesses to history. We all know farmers who are good friends of ours, great farmers and what have you, and they kind of leave it to other people. We can't indulge ourselves, in my view, in that kind of a mindset. We're in a transformational moment. We all have to engage. I'm a big fan of associations. I like them for a few reasons. They're there on scene. They're trying to make a difference. I like them also because it means people in agriculture are engaged. They're involved one way or the other. So I'm a big fan. The crops I grow, I belong to those associations. I belong to the statewide associations. I just do because I think it's an essential element to what we're trying to do in California agriculture. It's been my experience as a farmer now, forget this political stuff for a moment. It's been my experience over the decades that I have now a new managing partner at my ranch. I have a new managing partner. I want to suggest to you that you look at your situations and decide whether you might have a new managing partner as well. Government in California has become so intrusive in our lives that today, when I'm there making decisions regarding my farm, my ranch, all of a sudden I'm saying, but wait a minute, what about government? What are they doing now? What are they going to do in the future? That in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. We should be more worldly in our thinking. But most of the time, for me, government is telling me no. Sometimes, a lot of times, without really credible reasoning. They're telling me no when I know what I have to do, just like you know what you have to do. When you think of it in those terms, I'm happy to hear from any of you that suggest otherwise. But for me, I treat government as my managing partner. And so when I'm trying to make decisions, they're sitting right there at the table with me. They are. A little bit of that's okay. In my view, in California, we've gone way past a little bit. So I'd like you to give some thought to how intrusive government is in your lives. And back to you students, I didn't know this then. I didn't know it when I was your age. I didn't know that somebody else was going to tell me whether I could survive in business or not. But I know it now, and I hope you, through your studies and your relationships that you build, will know it, and you'll benefit, I think, in your career by knowing it. Constituents have power. Now, sometimes it's only on election day because you've got the vote. But it's power that we in agriculture too often don't fully express. We've got to get better at that. Associations are doing a lot of good work in that regard. But we've got to get better. So last thought on associations, I pay my dues. It's my obligation, I think, to support the associations that represent me. I want you to think about building relationships. And when I talk to groups, some people say, well, how do I do that? How do I do that with a politician? Let me give you an example of a guy named Charlie. Real life example, it actually happened just this way. I go in to see a senator some years ago. Senator, I need your vote on this and that. If it's on an agriculture issue. Eventually the senator looks at me and says, what's Charlie think? I said, Senator, I apologize. I don't know Charlie. Who's Charlie? You don't know my friend Charlie? Great guy. I said, well, I don't, but if you'll give me his number, I'll call him. He did, I did. I said, Charlie, I'm calling you, and I told him the story. Charlie says, I don't know anything about agriculture. I said, would you just listen for a minute as to what the issue is? He said, oh, sure. So I explained. Charlie said back to me, it makes sense to me. Now remember, Charlie knows nothing about agriculture, but he's a friend of a senator. It makes sense to me. I said, Charlie, will you call the senator and tell him that you just said that to me? I went back in to see the senator a few days later, big smile on his face, and he says, "Here, I heard you talk to Charlie. I'm with you on that bill. If you've got relationships, you make things happen. If you don't, somebody else will, with relationships, will make something happen. You got to decide whether you're going to be a witness to history or engaged in making a difference." Part of that, in my view, is just understanding the image we have with people. That takes me to Disneyland. I'm down at Disneyland a couple of years ago to give a speech to clients. I hadn't been there in a while, and so I wanted to walk down Disney Street, but you have to go through security. Well, when I'm not wearing these suits and ties, I was wearing Wranglers and Roper boots. And so I'm going through security, and a guy is checking whatever I had, and then he looks at me and he says, "You're a farmer, aren't you?" This is exactly how it happened too. And instantly, I can tell you, inside I was smiling because he recognized me as a farmer, and we're salt of the earth and all those kind of things. He only said one thing to me after I said, "Yes, I'm a farmer." He said, "It sure takes a lot of water to grow an almond, doesn't it?" It's exactly what he said to me. I kind of smiled and waved and moved on. Millions of people in that area of the state of California, somebody sees a farmer, and the first thing that they thought about was how much water a farmer uses to grow a crop. The first thing, the only thing. I was expecting him to say, "You feed America. You people are the salt of the earth." I really was in that instance thinking that. Not within a country mile of it. It was about how farmers are overusing resources. That's what he was really saying by asking how much it takes. That was my experience at Disneyland. That was my experience with Charlie. That exists. If we in agriculture are going to make a difference, we've got to know that. We've got to know that there's plenty of people in Sacramento that say us in agriculture are over-farming California. Now, you can judge for yourself as to whether that's true or not, but that basic thought process means that, to some degree, agriculture is expendable. I don't take that view. We exist. Us farmers exist. We exist in communities that we all rely upon. When you fallow an acre of ground, it better be for a better reason than passing a one-dimensional law. We've got to be protecting the landscape, not just as farmers. And so we need to, I think, convey a different message in agriculture. For me, the term I use is the human condition. Before we go in and start using terms like, water people in the room can appreciate this. A lot of times I'm with water engineers and they're talking about cubic feet per second. Who in the world knows what a cubic foot per second is relative to water? Certainly the politicians don't. And yet, if you're in water, you use the term. Lawyers are guilty of it. Every profession is guilty of it. And you got a legislator sitting there listening to you, and you're using that legislator's time talking to the legislator about something that he can't relate to, or she can't relate to. How can they relate to a cubic foot per second? I use that as the example, but we do that in agriculture, and we've got to change our speech patterns so we can effectively talk to politicians. There was one at my ranch the other day. She wanted to see the agave. And so I put a stake in the ground, 4-foot high stake. And she wanted to see pistachios. So I showed her both. But I explained to her what we're trying to do in agriculture, at least with agave. At the bottom of the stake, 4-foot stake, I said, I'm not being critical of my crop of pistachios, but it takes this much water every year, that stake. I didn't talk about acre feet, and I didn't talk, it's that stake right there. She's taking a picture of it with her phone. At the bottom of the stake, I've got a white line at the 3-inch mark. I said, I'm in agave in part because that's how much water I'm going to use on that crop right there. She's standing right by the agave. I said, we're doing what we can in agriculture to be as efficient as we can. But at some point, you've got to be within limits about what government thinks we can do, as opposed to just saying, agriculture always figures it out. We've gotten to the point where we're not figuring it out, not as effectively as we once did. So she's riding along with me, just the two of us riding along in the Kubota as I'm driving her around. I started talking to her, and not about the crops and what have you. I was talking to her about the human condition. I was talking to her about our community. I said, look around you. Look at the sacrifices that are going to be occurring with everyone, with the decisions being made by you folks in Sacramento. Think about it. I don't know if it was my talk with her or not, but I happened to run across a message she gave in a speech she gave like 2 weeks later. And somebody printed it, and I happened to run across it. And to my great satisfaction, she was talking about the human condition. I think we in agriculture need to be seen for more than people think we are. We need to be seen for who we are. The things that agriculture does every day of its life, not just to grow a crop, not just to buy the animals at the county fair, not just to support this cause and that cause. We are part of a community. And so years ago, a client and I and a few others put together a Save Our Community event, all surrounding water. And we had speakers, 7 speakers. Only 1 was from agriculture. There was a public education person. There was a sheriff. There were 7 of them. And at the end, the sheriff spoke last. And he said, if we don't get this right relative to water, we're all going to be victims of the crime that comes from a crumbling community. Silence in the room. Stone silence. That's the kind of messaging I think we in agriculture need to start with. We need to connect with the audience. We know what we know. We need to connect with them. I'm kind of happy that that legislator learned about agave and then used human condition. I'm happy about that sheriff saying what he said. I'd like us farmers and us agribusiness people to be talking about community a lot more than I think we do. It's not as though we're not caring. It's just we're busy with our lives. And we got this managing partner over here telling us what to do every day. We got to make time in our presentations, I think, human condition, community. And so I'd like to see this assembly in the years ahead to have city council people, people that are part of the community here, not just us agriculturalists, because it's this blending of a community that I think is our future in agriculture, and nothing wrong with it. I think that's a wonderful future to have. So, we really have no choice, in my view. We've got to make the time. I know we're all busy, but we got to crowd some time into our lives if, in fact, you agree that we have outside forces here that are really, really taking over our lives. We've got to overcome our anger. In my view, California agriculture, generally speaking, is a very angry industry. And I know why we're angry. But if we allow our anger to control our messaging, then who's going to be listening to us in the final analysis? We've got to be more effective in how we're conveying our point of view. We've got to leave that anger at the door, be driven to have the right thing happen for our communities, and we'll all benefit as a result. In summary, I want all of us, starting with you students, I want you smarter than you are now. No matter how smart you may be on a report card, you got to be a lot smarter. You've got to understand how this public policy thing is a big part of all of your lives, whether you end up in agriculture or somewhere else. Public policy is just a big deal. I didn't know it then, but I know it now. we've got to be more committed. After all, it's our future we're talking about. If we're not committed, then who else is going to be for us? And we've got to return to the days when we were more relevant. It could be argued in some settings, like with the senator at the top of a hotel bar in LA. And I'm talking to this senator, and I naively ask the question, what do your constituents think of agriculture? I forget the name of the hotel, but fancy bar and all this kind of stuff, and we're up there being self-important. And I said, what do they think? He didn't even miss a heartbeat. He says, we don't. We don't think about farmers. He said, look around you. He said, let me tell you about the crime, the education issues. He went on. Why would we think about a farmer? That was his response. And he was a friend. He was actually helping agriculture in Sacramento on more than one occasion. But that was his answer. What does your constituent think about a farmer? We don't. So, we all have a job to do to get ourselves, we have to represent ourselves to the extent necessary to get people to listen. And then we have to listen hard. Most people talk and don't really listen enough. We need to be listening to the people who have opinion about us, who can affect our lives, and figure out how to manage that as effectively as possible. So I'm going to stay in agriculture. I'm not going anywhere unless I have no choice. But the challenges I face today were not like it was in Harmony. I guess you can't go back. But all I'm looking for is an opportunity to have balance so that the best idea wins. And I think we need to be pushing that any chance we get. Again, from a community standpoint, from a human condition standpoint. Thanks for listening. I appreciate your time. Any questions? Is there time for questions? Anybody have a thought or two?